Because of the cameras. It's all right.
Welcome. Good to see everybody. As we're getting everybody seated, I'd like to first and foremost echo what we've heard throughout the conference. It's so great to be back in person. We were just talking here as panelists that over the last couple of years we've had this opportunity to talk to a lot of you, and it's been on Zoom, and it's really hard to have that interaction, so it's so fabulous to be back. So thank you for joining us. We've been told this is the last really official session of the day, so we'll try to keep it enlightening. And you know, as we go through this, the one thing I do want to remind everybody that I have the ability to take questions throughout. So please, through the app, go ahead and send those through, and I'd be happy to make sure that we get to as many of those, if not all the questions. So my name is Jared Martin. I'm with Innovest Portfolio Solutions out of Denver, Colorado, and I'm excited to be here to talk through what we'd say is a very timely topic that's going to affect each and every one of us, and that's titled Participants' Engagement Trends in a Hybrid Environment. But I want to be cautious. Somebody already mentioned to me that they're really excited to hear about these new hybrid defined benefit plans. And that's not the hybrid we're talking about today. The hybrid is more workforce. You know, are your employees coming to? Are your employees staying home? Or, you know, if you're more on the plan sponsor side, how are you interacting? So, you know, very excited to have this conversation both with the group here, but also with, I would say, a very deep panelist group when we talk about all aspects of understanding the communication in education. So really, when we talk about the agenda for today, I wanted to do some quick introductions. And then you can see the goal, pretty specific, is how to manage the participant communication when you have participants both in the office, but also in a remote environment. So again, my name is Jared Martin. I am a consultant out of Denver, Colorado with Innovest Portfolio Solutions. I'll be your moderator today. I will probably weigh in as we go through this, but I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves.
Okay. Kelly Hires. I'm with the Virginia Retirement System. I'm the Defined Contribution Plans Administrator.
Hi, Greg Jenkins, Head of Institutional DC at Invesco.
And I'm Jeff Hudson, Principal Consultant at Relational Gravity from Indianapolis.
Great. And as we go through this today, it's going to be a very smooth, you're going to think that we've presented together 100 times, but this really is our first time together. But again, we think it's a very important topic that is very timely, but I always think it's important when you're in the room here, you know, as you walk out of this, is there one or two takeaways that you can think about? Are we doing everything we should? Maybe we're doing it backwards. Maybe some of the data or the ideas that are shared today are something. So, you know, questions I have for you is, why is this important? You know, I would say for me that's a pretty easy, you know, want to make sure you engage, because you can build the best retirement plan out there, in your opinion, but if you're not getting those participants to take advantage or utilize that plan, then is it really the best retirement plan out there? You know, what are others doing? Are others doing stuff that we should be thinking about? And then again, is there one or two takeaways? I do think that as a lot of us would probably coin, the new normal. What is the new normal? You know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think the common thing I always get from both participants and plan sponsors is, I know that we need to be patient, but this time it's different, right? And I guess that question is it really different, or is it just how we're going to change the way we do business? So we're going to go down. I'm going to pass the baton here, and we're going to walk through some slides. But throughout this, I would love to have that Q&A. And so to start, we're going to have Kelly really give a background of kind of her role. It's unique in the sense that she sat on both sides of the fence, so she really has an understanding of both, you know, building the plan, but also executing the plan from the plan sponsor. So Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Jared. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to be here today. I'll say the same thing. It's been several years since I have presented anything in front of a live audience, so I'm excited to be here. I am the Defined Contribution Plans Administrator for the Virginia Retirement System. And before I get too far along, I want to introduce my plans a bit. We actually have 8 separate defined contribution plans at VRS. We have primary plans, supplemental plans. We have a plan with 2 people and another one with 3, and we have plans with 200,000 plus people. We have plans that serve 30 employers, and we have plans that serve 900 employers. So when we think about participant engagement from the plan sponsor perspective, we have a lot of factors that we have to kind of take into account. And I want to mention, before I jump into the next slide, we are a plan sponsor. We are not an employer. We serve lots of employers. And so in many ways, we serve as a third-party administrator for our employers in the plan. And it's important for us to have open lines of communication because we have to learn about your employees through you as employers in the plan. You're the ones that have all of the information, most of the information, about your employees to help us figure out how to best engage them. So that's kind of what hopefully your takeaway from my section today will be. So when I talk about knowing who your employees are, I will, as Jared mentioned, I've worked in payroll, I've worked in human resources, managing a 401k plan for a small private sector company. I have been a benefits administrator for a local government employer in a state level plan. And I've worked for a record keeper in participant education. And in that role, I learned a lot. I learned that there is a huge range of jobs out there. I can remember showing up for Department of Transportation meetings at 6 o'clock in the morning before they hit the road. And once they hit the road to work on the roads, they are not in front of a screen. They're not dialing into webinars. They're not checking email. I've worked at a maximum security prison that I've had to show up at 8 o'clock at night because that's shift change and that's the only time they can show up to talk to people. They're not sitting in front of a computer. I've done meetings at K through 12 employers where it's the same thing. You have to figure out what kind of a work environment your folks work in, and it may differ dramatically from one department to another. The other things you have to think about is where do they live? And what I mean by that is Virginia is a pretty diverse state geographically. We have beaches and we have mountains. And on the southwestern side of our state, broadband internet is a struggle on a regular basis. And our employers make sure we are aware of that. So we can't be completely reliant on virtual meetings and email signups and things like that, things that are delivered in an electronic format. We have to be able to provide those folks with resources that their employees can actually use on a consistent basis. So you as an employer in the plan, you understand those things. You know how much your employees make. Employers that have a bunch of engineers are going to have different average salaries than employers that are K through 12 school divisions. So understanding those kinds of pieces of information and data points, how many participate in your plan? Hopefully you know that. And those kinds of things are important to figure out how to best engage your employees. So the next step, once you've kind of thought through that, what kind of plan do you have? And that's going to go a long way in figuring out what your goals are. Engagement it's a big term. We throw it around a lot. It's a pretty general term. What does it mean for your plan? What is the end goal of that engagement? Is it getting more people to participate? Well, maybe if you have a supplemental plan, but not if you have a primary plan. Or is it getting beneficiaries? I know one of the big pieces of engagement that we've tried to work on over the last few years is getting our folks to claim their accounts. If you sit in on the data security session yesterday or today, you probably know what I'm talking about. Getting your folks to go out there, register for their accounts online, and that opens the doors for a lot of things, and it helps them secure their accounts. So that's an important thing to think about. So asset retention, that's a big goal for my plans. We think about that on a regular basis. How do we keep people in the plan and make sure that they're aware of the benefits of staying in the plan? So we worked on a variety of different communications efforts over the years, and I'm going to touch on some of those in just a few minutes. But I want to kind of point out these things because I think it's important. We've had a number of sessions that have talked about engagement, and engagement should be. You should have a goal for that. There should be a purpose for it. There's something that you want them to do, right? So being mindful of what that is goes a long way in helping you figure out how to craft your messaging. And my fellow panelists, Greg and Jeff, are going to go over all kinds of research and information that will help you figure out how to craft that messaging when you get to that point. But before you get there, you need to put some framework around it. So that's my next point that I want to mention. Work with your providers. You have, I am not an expert in communication. I am a DC plan administrator. That is my sole job. That is what I do. I am not a visual graphic designer. I don't do those things. But I have worked, and my team and I at the retirement system have worked really hard to develop a great relationship with our record keeper so that they can help us craft those things, because they have communications people and they're the experts in that. So that, along with consultants that do all kinds of amazing research to help you figure out whether you should use the word retirement or you should use financial future. So there's all kinds of research out there that your experts and your industry partners have to help you. You're not alone in this, and you just need to think about, who are my people? You need to help them understand those things so that they can help you accomplish your goals. So the last thing, and I'm going to mention a couple of communications efforts that we have undertaken in the past. You want to work with your record keepers, with your consultants, like I said, to figure out what are your goals, who are my employees, how do they like email, do they like somebody to come sit down in a meeting with them and talk to them. So those types of things, put your campaign together, whatever it is that you're working on, and then execute it. And then you need to review your outcomes. So I'm going to share with you a couple of outcomes. I'm not going to go over a whole lot of data points with you, but I will share with you back in, I think, 2017, we worked on what we thought was a fabulous campaign. And it was a mailing postcard. So I just want to mention again, we are the plan sponsor. We're not an employer. We can't go put up posters in break rooms. We can't necessarily send mass emails out to your employees for these types of things. So as the plan sponsor, our options to communicate directly to folks are pretty limited. And while it would be great if we had email addresses, and I know you're going to touch on that, we don't have email addresses for all of our folks in the plan. So we thought that it would be a great idea for us to send a postcard directly to their homes from the retirement system to encourage them to get started in their supplemental 457 plan. So the postcard was a lovely postcard. It actually looked really nice. I went back and looked at them the other day, and I was like, these look really good. They were generational. We did 3 different postcards with different imagery and different messaging that was appropriate for the age group, and I thought they looked great. We sent them out to over 11,000 people. We had less than a 1% response rate. Yeah, that's a lot of expense, a lot of resources that went into developing that. And what our lesson from that is that we can't do that on our own. So engagement has to be more than just one single point of contact. It has to be a multi-medium approach. We've done other similar mailing campaigns. Some have been more successful than others, but none of them produced the kind of results that we wanted. And so what we have learned over time, and what we've tried to do with other efforts that we put together, is it needs to be social media, it needs to be video, it needs to be print. We need to include messaging in their quarterly statements. We need to include flyers that their employers can order and download and put up in their break rooms. And so we've tried really hard to develop, we call them toolkits. We have a variety of them, and they're basically prepackaged resources that we provide to our employers that they can pick and choose from, that pre-created slides that they can stick into a presentation when they're doing new hire orientation, or videos that they can watch, they can put on during orientation sessions, so that our employers can pick and choose what mediums are appropriate and most beneficial for their folks. So that's kind of been our approach, and I would say that that has been a much more successful effort than our postcard campaigns. But again, they looked great. They just weren't all that successful. So that is all that I have for you today, and with that I will turn it over to Mr. Greg Jenkins.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. I'm going to start out with a story.
So Greg, can I stop real quick? So
Yeah.
Just maybe to wrap up a couple things, and thank you.
Sure.
I had a couple questions, and a couple questions come through,
Okay.
and I think it'll be helpful then as we roll into kind of the data side of the conversation. And I think you answered this one, but I want to read it anyway. To what extent have you used digital solutions to improve retirement outcomes, contribution rates, and personalized asset allocation?
So we've done a number of things. One of the things that we did over the pandemic, we totally revamped the way, so we have a dedicated staff of field reps out in the field, and we completely revamped the way people would go out and schedule meetings with them. We worked with our record keeper to put together some really nice HTML emails that they could send out directly that would include direct links for scheduling things, and that was a very successful digital campaign that we put together related to that. We've redone videos on our websites to make them shorter, more consolidated, animated in some cases. And so I think that's those types of things. Yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
So one of the messages I got from you that people don't read their mail, right? However, one question did just come through. Did you use QR codes on the postcards that you sent out?
So the first campaign that I mentioned, we did not use QR codes. That one in 2017, we did not. We actually just included the links to the website. Go here and sign up for your plan, and we used the phone number for the customer service line. Fast forward to 2020, I think, we did another mailing campaign to a similar population, and this go round we did different postcards for the different territories that our field reps worked in, and we included their direct contact information and their name and their email address, and we did include a QR code to the website so that they could very easily access that information. And that was kind of in tandem with the other changes we were making. That one, again, direct mail is just not a super effective means to communicate to people, but it was significantly more effective than the one in 2017.
Okay,
So.
that's helpful. So then one last question I had, and I know in the room we have employers and plan sponsors, and I know you were pretty clear about where your role is, but, and for the organization you have, I mean, you have resources to some extent.
Yes.
What about scalability though? I mean, we have a lot of employers that might either not have the dollar amount or the people behind that.
Yes. So work with your providers.
Okay.
Your record keepers and your consultants are happy to work with you on these things. Like I mentioned, quite often they have prepackaged communications campaigns that you can go through, and similar to what we've done for our employers, they've got slides you can plug into presentations. If that's not your jam, they've got videos that you can customize, or flyers that you can send out, or they can help you work with all of those things. You don't have to have those resources in-house. At the retirement system, I have DC plans is all I do, and I know that for many of our employers, and probably many of you in this room, you wear a lot of hats. DC plan administration is probably just a small portion of what you do for a lot of folks. So in recognition of that, we try to create things that you can kind of just plug and play, and your record keepers are willing to work with you on that as well.
No, that's helpful. I have more questions, but we'll
Okay.
pause there. So I think then flipping the script a little here, from your side, I think it's going to be helpful then to hear from Greg and Jeff on more industry and looking at some of the data and what it's shown us. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jared. So I'm going to start with a little story. And I know it's late in the day. I'm curious to know if anybody knows this. Does anyone know what happened on April 15th, 2019? Anyone? All right, I'm going to be really impressed if somebody knows this. I'll give you a hint. It was in Paris, France. Anyone? Okay. Oh, I was hoping somebody would get it. So that was the night of the devastating Notre Dame fire. And it's kind of one of those news items that got lost in the pandemic. But there was a really great story about 6 months later in the New York Times that went through exactly what happened that night. And as it turned out, Notre Dame had spent years and millions of dollars implementing a very sophisticated fire system throughout the complex. And it's a huge complex. And there was hundreds of sensors all over the cathedral. They even had these aspirating sensors that actually pull in air and test it for signs of smoke or fire. So extremely advanced. However, they had not properly communicated or trained anyone on staff as to how the system really worked, or perhaps just a few people. So when the officer was sitting in the security room that night and the fire alarm went off, there was a code on his screen. You can actually even Google this, but there was a code on his screen, an alphanumeric code. He had no idea what it meant. Had he did, it would have told him exactly where the fire was in the complex, and he would have known how to direct the fire department. But he didn't. So he tried to call his boss, couldn't get a hold of him, sent a guard to the wrong part of the cathedral, and long story short, the fire department got to work over a half hour late, and as a result, we almost lost the cathedral. So it's an extreme example, but back to what Jared was saying earlier, we can design the most sophisticated financial benefits, the most leading edge retirement plans, but if participants don't know how to use them, if we're not communicating, then it could all be for naught. So I'm going to talk about a few things. First of all, how to communicate with language that works. Secondly, how to use infographics to get across complex ideas, to make them simple. And then lastly, how to use multiple modes of communication, expanding a little bit on what Kelly talked about. So let's get into language research. We've been doing language research at Invesco since 2007, and we've done over 20 studies, and we team up with a firm called Meslansky and Partners. They are language experts. This is all they do, is analyze language in the financial services industry, pharmaceuticals, and other businesses. They actually have a podcast I would highly recommend. It's very interesting if you're into this sort of thing. So on all these studies, we start with interviews. In this case, we did interviews with 7 plan sponsors, both public and private. That's really where we find out what the issues are that are facing retirement plans today. Secondly, we do focus groups. 5 virtual focus groups in this case. I'm a big fan of virtual focus groups. I was kind of skeptical, kind of attached to the in-person focus groups, but they're very powerful. You can get a broad cross-section of people from all over the country together at one time. And then lastly, we did an online survey. In this case, it was 1,000 participants, public and private plans, and I get the question every time, no, we didn't survey federal workers. So I want to emphasize the focus groups. That's really where we find out how people think. Sometimes you get results on these surveys that don't make a lot of sense or are surprising, so you go back to the focus groups and you find out a little bit more about how people feel about the topic. So in all of our research, we've come across 4 key principles that you can use in any communication to make it more effective, and it's real simple and easy to remember. It's 4 Ps: positive, plausible, plain spoken, and personal. So let's go through each one. Positive, using language that's hopeful. And this doesn't mean, I know this came up yesterday in the general session, but it doesn't mean telling people that everything's great. That's the wrong approach. But it means spinning a positive, hopeful message into everything that you communicate. You may get a reaction quickly from a little bit of fear selling, but Meslansky has worked over the years and determined that fear selling just doesn't work anymore. And maybe it did at one point, but it doesn't work in terms of generating long-term engagement. Secondly, plausible. This is about believable benefits, and don't ask participants to do the impossible, like predict the future. Plain spoken. I think it goes without saying, our industry is full of jargon. It is horrible, and a lot of these terms are lost on the average person. We've also found that even when people know what the jargon means, they're still annoyed by it. Another important aspect is that as much as men hate jargon, women hate it even more. And when we learned this, I was really excited to go home and tell my wife about that. And I told her, and she just stared at me, and she said, obviously. So I guess I wasn't real intuitive on that one. And then lastly, personal. This is probably the most important of the four. Personalize the message. So use words like you and your. People don't like to talk about investments or retirement in the abstract. They want to talk about their retirement. They want to talk about their investments. So that's a great way to make your communications more powerful. So we're going to go through a couple findings. In the first one, we asked, which would you rather hear your employer communicate? That our plan is constructed to be best in class or continuously improve with feedback from employees just like you? Anybody want to venture to guess why the second one did so much better? Any ideas? Okay, it's positive. Yep, exactly. Exactly, no jargon. The first one, what's wrong with the first one? Constructed to be best in class. Okay, best in class is a term we've seen used a lot. People don't believe it, right? Nothing's the best. And also the word constructed, it's a little jargony. Constructing portfolios, that sounds perfectly normal to us in this room, but to the average person, that's a little bit abstract. So that's a great example. Let's talk about fees. And I know there was a whole session on communicating fees, so this should be right on target. We asked people, which of the following would you least like to pay as a participant? Fees, commissions, charges, or costs? And we find that fees is the least liked. The best word is costs. Believe it or not, people even like the word commissions better than fees. And the reason is the word fees has really changed over time. It used to mean what something costs. Now it's something additional, something extra. So people think of baggage fees at the airport. They think of the fees from Ticketmaster when you go to a concert. So now it means something above and beyond what something costs. So whenever you can, I would encourage you to use the word costs instead of fees. And I know you can't always do that, but even if you do it half the time, you'll get a better result. Also, never use the word transparent with fees. This is one of the worst words we've ever tested. And it's getting worse. I don't know what it is, but it's actually getting worse over time. And we got a comment in a couple of focus groups. One guy said, oh, that's a word that politicians use. So, and another lady said, I don't believe it. So I think it's a word that's been overused and has lost its meaning. A much better word is straightforward. So straightforward costs, straightforward fees even is better than transparent. Okay, so let's talk about infographics. Infographics are a great way to get a complex idea across and make it simple. When we read publications, we read the Wall Street Journal, we read Forbes, they use infographics all the time. I think sometimes in this industry we get caught up in trying to turn everything into prose, and it's tough to do. So this example is from a client that came to us. They wanted help explaining how staying in the plan in retirement is cheaper and more beneficial than, in many cases, than rolling it over and using an advisor in an IRA. So they took their plan fees and they wanted us to compare it to some national averages from Morningstar on advisor fees and IRAs. And you can see the difference here is easy to see. There's a 3-year gap. The person that left their money in the plan would have 3 more years of retirement funded. And this was for a group of science folks, so that's why we have all the figures on the side of the page. But as Kelly said, I think this is a great example of leveraging your relationships, leveraging the firms you work with. This client would have never gotten this if they had not come to us. Now, by the way, we went to a graphics firm to get this. We went to a firm called 5W, and they do infographics for USA Today and for other publications. And you may want to check with your vendors to see, they may have these resources in-house. Your record keeper might, or some of the investment managers you work with, or if you don't find it there, you can go out and get it on your own. This did not cost a king's ransom. This was very inexpensive. So just using the tools that are already out there. Lastly, I'll talk about communication modes. So how do people like to be communicated with? We asked people, and this particular survey was about retirement income, but we asked people, how would you prefer to receive information about a retirement income program? And you can see the online portal won out. Now here's the surprise, and the twist here is that personal email actually did better than work email. This was a real surprise for the corporate crowd, maybe not as much for this room. And public employees, as you can see, like personal email even more. Now I know I've talked to some of you in the room about personal emails. I just wanted to get your opinions, and I know there's some issues with personal email in many cases, but it's just food for thought. And maybe the pandemic moved the needle a little bit on this. We're not really sure, but just something to think about. A meeting was preferred by some. That trended much further towards baby boomers, no surprise there, as did the mail. The mail was almost exclusively baby boomers on this survey. And then finally, video and text messages. Now, we were a little surprised by the 2% in these categories. So at the focus groups, we asked people about this, and here's what we learned. People don't want their primary mode of communication to be through video clips or text messages. As a supplementary method, it makes a lot of sense and it works. I know the state of Missouri uses video clips pretty extensively. They've had a lot of success. So I think as a supplemental way of communicating, it can be very, very effective. But I think we sort of dispelled the myth that maybe young people only want to receive text messages and use social media and receive video clips about their retirement savings. So hopefully that'll help. So remember the 4 Ps of communication, real simple. And remember to think about your modes of communication and also use infographics when you want to get across those complex ideas.
Great. So a few questions. One question came through. What's the name of the language podcasts?
If you just look up Ms. Lansky and Partners, I think they advertise on their website, and I believe it's on Spotify as well. I'm sorry?
PSA?
Oh, Hearsay. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I think at the first level, and this data really is helpful, but what do you do with it, right? I mean, to your point, is this data that goes to the employer, to the plan sponsor, how do you take this data and shift the way you're communicating with participants?
Sure. So we have clients that have used our language research to scrub their own materials and to remove jargon, try to remove, make messages more positive, plausible, all those things. And that can be effective. And it does require you to work with your partners. And so it's a process. And the other thing we hear from clients is that jargon especially is like weeds in this industry. It just pops up continually. So you can remove the jargon from your materials and from your website, and it's going to come back, whether it's through, well, I know where it comes from the attorneys. but yeah, it'll tend to pop up. So it's a continuous process.
So, and then you mentioned multiple times, in this graph as well, generational, right? The data,
Yes.
you can tell generational. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into that. I mean, one, what have you seen generationally in those responses? But 2, how do you take that data and make sure, because here you're saying, well, 12 people do like the mail, those 12 people. But do you look at doing all of this? I mean, does that make sense?
Sure. So we've seen some general generational patterns that I can talk about.
Yeah.
So overall, I would say that baby boomers, the older participants with bigger balances, they're going to care more about tax benefits. They're going to care more about low costs. When it comes to younger participants, they're all about convenience. That's why target date funds are a hit with younger participants. They love the convenience factor. Okay. So that's some of the couple of the general trends that we see.
And then a question came up on email. How do you overcome the barrier of the spam email concept when emailing mass?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that may be part of the personal email, because what we heard from people, believe it or not, is as crowded as my personal email inbox is. People said that their work email was even worse. And so things were getting lost in the shuffle in their work email. So I think that goes back to what Kelly was saying. You've got to use multiple modes of communication, and don't think of, don't try to measure the effectiveness of one piece or one effort. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Great. One last question on fees. You did the study on the fees. What other findings did you find on fees? I mean, was there one concept of how they like to be charged fees? Sounds like if you say commission, that's much better.
That's right. Well, I think one thing that's interesting is you would think, conventional wisdom would tell you that lowest costs are what people really want. But we haven't found that. We found that actually high value is what they want more often. They want cost efficient, not lowest cost. And we went back to the Maslansky folks on this, and they see this in a number of industries. When it comes to a commodity type item, people are going to look for the absolute lowest cost they can find. Like think about a tube of toothpaste. You're going to find that tube of Crest as cheap as you can. But when it comes to something that affects your family, something where making a decision could have a negative impact, that's when high value and cost efficient takes over.
Great. We'll have a couple more, but I want to hold tight on these because I do think there'll be some overlap as well with Jeff. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation as we talk even a little bit more about data and what do we do with that data. So Jeff, I'll turn the floor over to you.
All right, well, we'll jump in here. First off, Jeff Hudson, Relational Gravity. What I've done in a career is market research, communication. I started out with health education and moved into the world of retirement services and worked for 15 years with the Indiana Public Retirement System. So what I'm going to show you here is a case study that we did in partnership with DECIA and some research that they have done. But the question is, does messaging tone matter? And we've already heard that it does matter, and the words you choose do matter. But there is the debate over which works better, encouragement or caution. Now, I've been asking people that question through this conference. When we were working on this case study, I asked people participating on my staff, what do you think? And the answers were all over the place. So I had a conversation probably about an hour ago with individuals who said, sometimes a fearful message is important when it comes to protecting yourself from identity theft or something like that. But we're going to take a look at a case study that addressed that question. And one of the things I want to point out is that all of you in here can participate in research of this type. There is, to geek out for a minute, there's something called the theory building research cycle that says that we observe things out in the field that gives us an idea of the questions we wonder about. This could be when you observe things with your participants, this could be focus groups, this could be conversations with plan sponsors, and it gives you some ideas of questions you'd like to follow up on. You follow up on those, maybe you do a survey, that sort of thing, but once you come up with an idea of what you think is the right way to go on something, then you field test it. And that's where everybody in this room can participate in field testing. And field testing simply says we're taking the ideas that we've learned in research and we're testing them. And while it's delightful to have ideas affirm what you believe to be true, it's also, in my opinion, equally delightful and effective when you find out that you're not 100% correct on something, you've got more to try, more to learn, because then you're learning, and it's a cycle that says that we get better and better at participant engagement if we keep our eye on the research and then try it out in the work we're doing out in the field. So in this case, as I mentioned, DECIA did a study, a survey that of 1,000 participants, planned participants, and first off, they found participant engagement increases through communication. That's good news, and prompts, some prompts for action. Now, their study found that theoretically, cautionary messages were slightly more effective than encouraging ones. But that was a study of saying, how do you think you would respond to a particular type of message? And the nice thing about research is you can ask those questions, but then you can test it out in the field. So that's what we did. I will tell you, first off, if you ask me for a firm answer of does fear or hope sell better, I think to some degree I'm going to say, give you the attorney that any attorneys in the audience are familiar with, and that is it depends. There's a circumstance there. But so what we had in our study, and DeSia had approached us and said, we're looking for some plan sponsors to kind of do the other part of this research and test this out in the field. So we said, well, we can put together some goals for this and then do a survey, or not a survey, but a test. And our goals were to communicate income replacement progress to participants, and finding a simple way to do that. As you know, there can be a lot of dialogue on how do you calculate potential income replacement, and then how would you communicate that to a participant in a way where you can be accurate and not held accountable later for saying you promised me this much money and in fact I didn't get that much. And then use encouraging and cautionary messaging to influence engagement. Now, the question is, what is engagement? Engagement is a whole host of things. In this case, we narrowed down the definition of engagement to being a couple of behaviors. Number one, did I open the email? And number two, then, did I click through? Did I follow a prompt to click through, go to a website where I could review my account? And so that's a narrow definition of engagement, but that's very often how you have to test things, is with narrower definitions. So first off, how did we arrive at talking about income replacement in a way that was safe, efficient, and didn't take too many committee meetings to do? The good news is with Indiana is that it's the systems that we were looking at were both, the plans were hybrid plans that had both a defined benefit and a defined contribution component to it. So serendipitously, when I'm talking about a hybrid environment, I guess we're talking about the hybrid environment two ways in this case. So, but our focus was on the defined benefit part, because we knew that with accuracy, we could say, based on your years of service and the 1.1% a year that is going to be your income replacement from your final average salary, we could say how much of your income had you replaced there, and do it in an accurate way that didn't give compliance heartburn. So what we did is we constructed two emails, and the subject line for both was just the question, have you reviewed your potential retirement income? There could be more compelling subject lines, so we're not going to go into which was more compelling, stronger, better worded, or whatever. But we also have, you're aware of that preview text, which, by the way, if you're sending out emails to folks and you're not capitalizing on that preview text, you're missing out, because that can make a big difference to people in opening emails and engaging. But the preview text for the first one was caution. You're making enough, or you're not, are you making enough progress towards replacing your income in retirement? And the other was, congratulations, you're making progress. And so just two different sides of the same coin. And then we went through and provided a content that said, you know, either there's a caution, you've replaced 15% of your income so far, please go review your accounts, or congratulations, you're making progress, you've replaced 15% of your income, please go and review your progress. Now I'm going to say that there are dozens of variables in here when you consider the word choices and all of that. So we'll focus at a high level on kind of the tones of the messages, understanding that that really, as you start looking at the words that work best, like fees and transparency questions versus saying, you know, expenses or whatever, there's words that work better, which we've just heard. And so there's ways to construct this text that could be more effective. But what we found is that emails with encouraging messages were 1.22 times more likely to be opened than cautionary. So in that sense, it confirmed some research, and yet other research that said, we didn't quite match. That's okay, by the way, because this is a learning process, and that's what we're trying to do here. Finding two, and this is an earth shaker, participants who were generally more engaged tended to be more engaged. Now, that's an important finding. Now, and actually, truthfully, the way that this was actually helpful was that we had worked with Voya, who was our record keeper, who was able to provide us information on these participants in terms of what level were they already engaged with using online tools. And so we were able to connect that with the databases that we were using to do this A/B test. And surprisingly, funny as it is, but it's true. Engaged people tend to be engaged. So if you want to know what the best indicator is of getting people engaged, it's to message engaged people. So take that home with you. But finding 3, those who received encouraging messages were 1.89 times more likely to log in than those who received the cautionary messages. And remember, we don't necessarily know why on these things, but you try to learn what's going on and then ask the questions why. So I'm going to come back to where I started, which is the theory building research cycle. And that is, this is where I encourage you to be aware of what national research is going on out there. You need to know what you've heard here today and what you've read elsewhere. Understand what's going on. Look for opportunities when you can test that in the field. Doing an email A/B test is a fairly simple thing to do. And for just about anybody here who is sending email to your participants, an A/B test is a simple way to do it. And while we did a large A/B test, you can also do an A/B test of just a small percentage of your email recipients, see which email gets the better response, and then use that for the bulk of the rest of your recipients. So you can learn from this. And that gets back to the point of try something different, measure the results, learn from it, and then be part of that dialogue that informs the national research that comes back and informs you how you can be a stronger plan administrator and engager of participants. Oh, should I go back? There.
That's great. So a couple questions. So you talk a lot about research, right? And I think it really goes to both of you, but Jeff will put this towards you. So you have a lot of research. One, does it give you absolutes? So does it give you pure answers? And if it doesn't, then what good is that research?
It's a very good question. And it gets back to that cycle. First off, we get smarter and smarter as we move along. So to give you a definite answer and say, I'm going to send you back to your offices and say, it's always this way, when I understand that it also may be different for your participants. Your plan and your plan demographics may be different than national research. But the process here is not necessarily to give you absolutes, but is to give you the ability to be smarter and smarter at doing what you do. And that's where research comes in, is that we learn something every time we do it. Looking for absolute answers is comfortable, but it doesn't always work out well for you. There's exceptions to everything, but be aware that research will, in the long run, help you do your work better.
Okay. A couple of questions came through. Thank you for that. I think that was helpful. 2 of them were similar, so I'm not sure if they came from the same person, but it was more product specific. So Jeff, this was directed to you. What's your view on using products like a managed account to help communicate income replacement progress to participants? So I think it's more features in a plan versus the language. So I don't know if you'd have a comment on that.
I think that managed accounts for the right people are the right solutions. But I think you need to understand who those right people are if you're going to offer it, and also understand then who is not necessarily going to tap into or benefit from managed accounts. So you need to be aware of who is using it and not assume that everybody's using managed accounts, so you got your problem solved.
Okay, thank you. One question just came through. If Preferred is an online portal, how do you get participants to go to the online portal? And really, I think that could go to any of you. Kelly, we haven't heard from you for a few minutes.
Sure. So we have 2 portals. I work for the retirement system, which is the pension benefit primarily. We have disability and life insurance and other things like that. And then we have a third-party record keeper that manages the defined contribution plans. As I mentioned when I introduced our plans, there's sometimes a lot of overlap between our plans, including the pension plan, and sometimes there's no overlap. We have thousands of people that participate in our supplemental 457 plan that aren't eligible to be covered by the pension plan. But we have 2 separate portals. So we have our defined benefit portal and we have our defined contribution portal that is managed by our record keeper. We've taken a lot of steps on the defined benefit side, where people log in to get their pension estimates and things like that, to incorporate DC plans and send them back to the DC plan portal. Single sign-on is on the list. We're working on it. I know it's important and it will help. We're not there yet. And then on the DC side, one of the steps that we have made on that side was to get rid of forms for the most part. And any forms that we have, for all practical purposes, you have to log into your account to get. So requiring that they log into their account, we have something very similar on the defined benefit side. Many things they have to log into their account to get. And that provides email contact information. They provide that when they log into those accounts. So it gives us there's another benefit over and above the security piece of it. But just continually developing things that are behind the login and not putting everything on the public website, which I think we've had a tendency to do for many years for us.
Anything either of you?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and I think you just got to try some different things. I think try reaching out with email to get people to log in. I had one client that did a contest. First-time logins, new logins to the site got entered into a drawing, and they had a $250 gift card, and they got a good response from that. Sure, some of them were one-time logins, of course, but you get more people who've never been behind the wall before, who've seen what's there, and they come back. So I think you just have to try a lot of different methods.
You know, I might add that always keeping in mind, it's from the participant's perspective, it's what's in it for me. And very often we're so passionate about helping participants, we know what they need, and we're trying to get them to access what they need. And if we can understand how can we engineer this so that there are the wants, there's something here that you're going to want. And it's not easy to do, but it's very often people might be attracted towards the what's in it for me, which could be as simple as an incentive to get them through the front door. And if you think about a grocery store with coupons, if I can get you in the front door, then I might be able to get you to become a regular shopper if you like what you found.
I guess this could be expanding on that. Is there technology that allows DC-related emails to appear in the inbox in a different color so they stand out?
Oh, I think there's all sorts of things you can do with email if you talk to the right vendors about that. I think there's a lot of things you can do. You can have tracking in emails with HTML. You can change the colors. I think there's a lot of techniques that are out there.
Okay. What's more important as it relates to potential adoption of any really product or solution? And let's just use retirement income as an example. But is it the actual product and solution, or is it the communication of that product and solution? And it could be on any it could be a new investment of any sort. What would you guys say?
Well, I'll just jump in first. I think you've got to make anything you can automatic. I know that all of you have different state laws that you're grappling with, but anything you can make easy or automatic, I would say do that. I think that's the first step.
Okay.
And I might jump in and say that communication is part of the solution, but coming from a career that began in marketing, you've got to have the right product. You've got to have a product that your participants want. And it's nice if it's something they need also, but you've got to have something they want. If you're relying on the promotion only, then you may find disappointment if you're trying to promote a product that really isn't a fit for your set of participants. So you need to understand, sometimes we take that horse and we whip it hard to try and get results out of communication that we're not getting an uptake, and it could be that it's a product or service problem. So keep that in mind. The two have to work together.
Yeah, I think, and I'll just add real quick, I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. You got to be patient. You got to give stuff time. We will not see results typically with these kinds of things, quickly. Think more like months and years rather than weeks.
So with this data that you've both shown us, I mean, how important is it that you continually look, right? I mean, you're saying a lot of it's generational. Mm-hmm. So right now, some people might still want to listen to a meeting and maybe even go into a Zoom meeting, but now we're moving more towards automatic features or you said simplicity, right? Mm-hmm. Convenient. Is that going to change? Or are we really just going this one direction that we're seeing the X, the Z, the millennial way? And how often should we be looking at this data?
Well, I'll just jump in here. I think you do need to continually revisit this stuff. And I've talked to the Ms. Lansky folks about what they've seen over time. They've been doing this for 25 years. They saw some changes with the internet bubble, some fundamental changes in how people think about financial services. They saw some changes again with the financial crisis, and then also with generations. And we keep talking about millennials like they're the youngest people involved here. Let's face it. I mean, there's 40-year-old millennials. So there's a whole new generation coming with a different set of ideas on, how the way things should be and the different ideas. They're using TikTok. I don't know if anybody's done this, but just create a TikTok account and search up, retirement plan saving, 401k, 457, and see what you get. It's pretty scary. There's a lot of, I'm not kidding. It's
true.
And my kids were telling me about this, and they said, "Oh, the people seem so professional," and there's a lot of Bitcoin promotion. Imagine that, and some other stuff. But take a look if you want to see what the next generation, Gen Z, is looking at.
And I do think that it also just reinforces the need to approach things in a variety of different manners, because even as we move forward and generations move out of the workforce and new generations move into the workforce, they're still all going to have, you're never going to have a workforce that's just one generation. So being mindful that you have different needs, different wants, different ways to actually reach people will continue to be important.
I would echo that and say, if you're using multimedia and multiple ways of channels of reaching people, this is not to say that a millennial is not going to read your paper newsletter. I mean, they might not. I mean, a lot of other people don't read your paper newsletter either. But it is, and for the expense, there's a question. But it is something that says there's a lot of channels, and you don't know where somebody may be when they connect with your message. So there's not a silver bullet, but there might be a variety of things you can do.
So I think we have a few minutes left, and the message I heard was, first and foremost, understand who you're representing and what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah.
And then work with your partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very important. But with that being said, what's one takeaway that you would encourage anybody either listening online or here in the audience that they should consider as they walk out of here today on how to help move that needle for participants?
So for me, I think it would probably be when you get back to the office this week, next week, take a step back and look at kind of your stable of materials that you have out there that have been sitting. Put them all together and take a look and see if you can see common themes across them. If they, like Greg said, scrub your materials and look at how what kind of messaging you've been using, what approaches you've been using. And on my last slide, once you have a plan together, you got to look at the data. You got to figure out what worked. Work with your record keeper and say, all right, well, we sent this email out. Can you tell me how many people opened it? How many people clicked on the link that we sent them, just like Jeff touched on? And then if it didn't work, revisit and do it again a little differently than you did the first time.
Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo a lot of the things Kelly said, but if you think about those 4 Ps, but just take 2 of them. Just take plain spoken and personal. Take out as much of the jargon as you can and try to personalize some of the messaging. And I think you'll see pretty quick results.
Great.
Yeah, I would have to agree first off with that if you get your content really solid and really good, it's going to work for you to some degree. And then just learning from it, and understanding how your participants might not be the same as the plan of the person sitting next to you today, and just learning those differences through trial and error.
So with that, my question to the group then is, as you think about your group and the new normal workforce, how are we going to continue to engage participants to make sure you encourage them? So thank you all very much. Appreciate the time and enjoy your evening.